The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the National Conference of State Legislatures webinar, Baseload Electricity versus Energy Markets, which explores the challenges states and regional markets are confronting due to the low wholesale electricity prices, state and federal incentives, and falling demand. Today's webinar is hosted by NCSL's Natural Resources and Infrastructure Committee. For a schedule of upcoming webinars and energy program resources, please visit www.ncsl.org. My name is Glenn Anderson, the Energy Program Manager at NCSL, and I will be moderating today's webinar. The webinar is being recorded, and registrants will receive a link to the recording and presentations within a few days. So let me introduce our excellent panelists today. We have Melissa Seymour, who is from the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, Michael McLaughlin from the Arnie from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and Senator Sue Rezin, Illinois legislator. Our presenters will be answering questions after the final presentation. Please type any questions in the question box on the right side of your screen at any time during the webinar. So let me introduce and summarize a little bit of Melissa Seymour's background, who will be our first speaker. She is the Executive Director of Customer and State Affairs in the Central Region for the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, an independent nonprofit organization responsible for maintaining reliable transmission of power in 15 states and the Canadian province of Manitoba. In this role, Ms. Seymour is the primary external leader for the Central Region, where she oversees the identification, planning, and execution of initiatives that facilitate stronger relationships between MISO and its customers and regulators. So please welcome Melissa Seymour to the webinar.
Thanks, Glenn. I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in the webinar and also to speak on this very interesting and really important topic. I'm going to spend just the beginning of my presentation going over a little bit about MISO, sort of who we are and what we do briefly for those of you who may not be as familiar. But I want to quickly transition into what we are seeing at MISO with respect to the evolution of the generation fleet and really describe some opportunities and challenges we see associated with that evolving fleet. And finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about what resource adequacy, I'll define that term later, and talk a little bit about what we do to work collaboratively with our states to ensure there continues to be sufficient resources to meet future customer needs, given sort of this evolving fleet that we're seeing. So with that, if we could go to the first slide. So as Glenn mentioned, I work for the long-worded Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, or MISO for short. And we are an independent, not-for-profit, third-party grid operator, or a regional transmission organization, as we often are called. And when I use the term grid, I'm really talking about the high-voltage transmission lines that move power from the generators to the distribution system. So the wires to your homes or the distribution system are separate and distinct. It's important to know that MISO is one of 9 grid operators. So if you look at the map on the left, you'll see that we're one of 9. And the tan areas that you see there are areas that are not covered by a grid operator or an RTO, but instead are operated really by vertically integrated utilities, municipalities, or cooperatives. Our goal is to ensure that electricity is delivered reliably and at the lowest possible cost. And our scope and scale is pretty significant. As you can see by the map, we serve a footprint that stretches from Manitoba to the Gulf of Mexico. And our members serve about 42 million people. We're headquartered in Carmel, Indiana, but we have operation centers in Eagan, Minnesota, and Little Rock, Arkansas. And really, we do 3 things as a grid operator. One is our real-time operations. That's really our #1 fundamental purpose, is to keep the lights on. We make sure they're safe and reliable operations of the electricity grid. We also have market operations. So we we operate open energy markets, including an ability to centralize scheduling for an economic dispatch for generation to support that reliable and efficient operation. And then finally, we do transmission planning. So we maintain transmission expansion plans. We work through those with our members and to make sure that we have a safe and reliable grid. It's important to note here that MISO does not own any generation or transmission. We basically operate the transmission grid and send dispatch signals to our generation fleet. So our members are the ones that own the generation and transmission. So if you move to the next slide, I thought it would be interesting for you to see on the next slide really where MISO is seeing the energy shift. And we're seeing it, it's pretty apparent here. If you look at the black color, which represents our coal fleet, it's declining in its share of the energy generation, and it's been relatively stable. It was relatively stable in the 2006 to 2009 period, but you started to see a distinct stair step downward through about 2016, and we expect this trend to continue. Right now, we're about 46% of our generation fleet is coal. 27% is gas-fired and 16% is nuclear, and we have 8% that represents renewables, primarily wind. The primary footprint-related impact to coal's share of our generation fleet occurred really through a transition that we had when we incorporated the MISO South, or the footprint in the southern part of our footprint, in December of 2013, because with that integration of the South, it brought significant gas generation along with increase in nuclear generation. So you'll see that mix changing in the 2012 to 2013 time period, and that had a lot to do with that integration. But that being said, 11 gigawatts can be attributed to coal retirements that we saw in the 2010 to 2013 period. And that was the result of really environmental regulations, such as the cross-state air pollution rule and mercury and air toxic standards being applied. In the last couple years, we've seen modest coal retirements in about the 2.8 gigawatt range. We do note that in addition to the environmental regulations, we're seeing that gas prices have, as you're well aware, have been extremely low and have really hit coal and nuclear hard. And so new gas-fired generation really accounts for most, if not all, of coal's losses. So when our coal plant retires, we see new generation of gas coming online. Although we also have wind generation, which has grown notably, especially in the northern and central portions of the MISO footprint. So the combination of those two have been replacing the coal fleet. One thing that we are looking at that I want to talk a little bit about is resource adequacy, because what we've seen is we're having more retirements than we're seeing units come online in a timely manner, which is really causing some concerns in the long term around making sure that we have enough resources to meet peak requirements or during the hottest summer months, and that's really what we're calling resource adequacy. And if you think about it, we want to make sure we have enough capacity or enough generation or resources in the mix to meet that peak demand plus a spare amount, which we call planning margin, to ensure that if we have that's for unexpected outages or things like the polar vortex, we just need that little bit of cushion. And that's what MISO sets for the region, is that cushion or that planning reserve margin. And resource adequacy is really important to consumers because we want to make sure we can reliably and cost-effectively meet those customer needs through stable and transparent prices. You can really think of having resource adequacy or having enough capacity like a shopping mall parking lot. I kind of use that analogy. So most parking lots and malls have enough space to handle customers' levels during peak shopping periods, like around the Christmas holidays. But on most days during the rest of the year, the lot is partially full. So that's kind of like what MISO does working with state regulators and electricity users and providers. We take a similar approach to making sure there's enough electric capacity in place to keep the lights on during the peak periods. And that capacity may not always be used, but it's committed to MISO in case it's needed to serve those customer needs reliably. And so we've been seeing these planning reserve margins, or this amount of cushion that we need, declining through time. And we've been putting in place things with that declining reserve margin or our changing portfolio to make sure that we're ready. We're making sure we have operational resilience and flexibility. We're making sure we have the ability to integrate new types of resources in a highly complex and changing transmission and distribution system. We're making sure we have tools in place and models to better understand new technologies, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. And then we're balancing the need to make sure that today's portfolio can stay online while anticipating and preparing for future changes. And that includes ensuring there's adequate transmission infrastructure for that evolving portfolio. So if you turn to the next slide, one of the things that this evolving resource portfolio is enabling is the emergence of new technologies and new types of resources, such as distributed energy resources and energy storage, and some of the different types of resources you see on the slide. Distributed energy resources are really resources that are operated for the purpose of supplying or reducing all or portions of a customer's electric usage. And they can include things like rooftop solar, combined heat and power, microturbines, demand response, and energy efficiency. We sort of see growth in this distributed energy resources has been slow in the MISO footprint in particular, but we're actively studying opportunities for integration. One area that hasn't been slow, I think, across the U.S. is energy efficiency. Many are forecasting that our national demand will decline overall in the future because energy efficiency will outweigh the load growth rate. Our long-term forecast, the MISO's long-term forecast, indicates that energy efficiency, demand response, and distributed generation will account for about 5% of reduction in peak summer demand. So it's making a notable change in our overall peak demand forecast. Adoption of the other demand response or distributed energy resources will be really dependent on consumers' economics and their ability and willingness to invest. I think it also will be dependent on, regional adoption is really based on state retail rates, policies, and incentives. So the more, the policymakers really need to look at the best approach for compensating distributed energy resources in the future, because I think this has been an area of issue with traditional retail rate structures and net metering policies, and I think that's something that we're seeing emerge as we're moving forward and trying to integrate some of these new technologies. Energy storage is another one that we hear a lot about, and I think adoption is growing there where policy is supportive and really where costs are a little higher in the market. So battery capital costs are really projected to decline and gain market share. We've seen adoption growing, again, in places where policy is supportive, like California and Germany. MISO right now has 3 grid-scale units energy storage units that range to be about 28 megawatts in total in the footprint, and we see about 70 megawatts coming online in the future. And we think these are good complements for MISOs, especially because we have a large wind capacity. So if economics develop, we think this will be a helpful product in the future. So right now I want to transition to the final slide that I have here and I talked a little bit about our concerns with resource adequacy. MISO really is there to support the achievement of resource adequacy at just reasonable rates and maintain confidence that there's the ability to attain that resource adequacy at all time horizons. And we want to provide sufficient transparency and market mechanisms to mitigate any potential shortfall. So we collaborate with the states to achieve this goal. So we coordinate with state regulatory agencies, and in our footprint that we discussed earlier, the MISO region is really made up of largely traditionally regulated states where the states regulate the vertically integrated utilities within their jurisdiction. And as you're aware, in traditionally regulated areas, new resource investments are really approved by the regulators, and local utilities can seek the cost recovery for those investments through approved retail rate charges. In contrast to that, restructured competitive retail markets, such as what we have in Illinois and a portion of Michigan, the state regulators don't oversee how those alternative energy suppliers meet their load obligations. And in addition, in some restructured states like Illinois, power plants are no longer owned and operated by a local regulated utility with that long-term obligation to serve. So in these states, merchant generation is used to meet customer needs, and state regulators do not approve cost recovery for these mechanisms. So these capacity and energy markets are used to recover those costs. So MISO's existing resource adequacy processes have really been proven to be useful and adequate for those traditionally rate-regulated portions of our footprint, where the state really oversees the resource adequacy requirements and provides that rate recovery. And we've struggled in areas, in competitive areas like Michigan and Illinois, with ensuring they maintain the resource adequacy. So what we're trying to do is work with the states, and we've taken a state-based approach to resource adequacy to ensure that is achieved. We worked with Michigan last year on legislation that was passed late last year that contained resource adequacy provisions that required all electric providers to demonstrate to their Michigan Public Service Commission that they have enough resources to serve the anticipated needs of their customers. And we are currently working with Illinois stakeholders on a similar, a different mechanism, but a similar approach to develop a long-term resource adequacy solution for downstate Illinois, which is the portion of Illinois that MISO serves. So with that, I'd like to pause, and I know we're going to take questions at the end, so I'd like to turn it back over to you, Glenn. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That was a really great overview of what MISO is doing and some of the technologies that they're dealing with and how those might be having impacts on the market. We did get a question that came in, so we'll just ask you one question here before we move on.
Sure.
And the question is related to one of the questioners states that their investor-owned utility is in the middle of a rate case that is looking for large rate increases, stating that it is needed to meet growing demand. However, you had indicated that demand is declining, or maybe rates of increase in demand are declining. So the question is really, what is the actual I guess, what is your view on this? And obviously those increases in demand are regional, but just in general, I guess, what are your comments on that type of question?
Sure. I would say just in general, in the MISO territory, we've seen decreases in demand that, keeping in mind that the load forecast or the demand forecasts are provided to us by the utilities or our members. We've seen on average in the north and central regions of our footprint, those declines mainly driven by industrial load, leaving, or commercial facilities not being shutting down. We have seen an increase in demand, I will say, in the south for the opposite reason, southern portion of our footprint, because of increases in industrials. So I think it's hard to say if you had new demand show up in your footprint. That is very possible. This is more averaged across the MISO footprint. So it is possible if you see new industrial demand or commercial load or changes in the load profile that you could see that increase. I think my position is more from the in total on the MISO footprint.
Great. Thank you very much. So we'll be moving on to our next presenter. Our next speaker will be Arnie Quinn, who is Director of the Office of Energy Policy and Innovation at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and we want to give him a special thanks for joining us at the last minute, and so he was unable to put together slides so quickly, but he has some really great information to share with us about what FERC is seeing. And prior to heading the Office of Energy Policy and Innovation at FERC, Mr. Quinn held several other positions at the Commission, including Director of Division of Economic and Technical Analysis, Office of Energy Policy and Innovation, and Director of the Division of Energy Market Oversight, Office of Enforcement. So let's welcome Arnie.
Thank you, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to speak at this webinar on issues that certainly have been very front and center at the Commission in the last year or so. I do have to start with my standard caveat that I'm expressing my own point of view, and I'm not expressing an opinion for either the Commission or any individual commissioner. So I'll talk a little bit first about how the Commission approaches issues generally, and then I'll talk a little bit more about how this issue about baseload energy and wholesale markets has appeared before the Commission more recently. To start, the Federal Power Act is by design and by construction a resource-neutral law. So the Commission approaches market issues from a very resource-neutral perspective. That doesn't mean that we don't pay attention at all to what's happening to different sorts of resource classes, that we are not attentive to changes in the resource mix, but it means at the end of the day, we don't and can't really do things specific for baseload energy or new technologies in terms of favoring them or disfavoring them. What we do though is we focus on what services those specific resources are providing, and then we make sure that those services themselves are being appropriately compensated. And what we have seen over time as the resource mix changes is that some services that we used to get basically for free or didn't pay a lot of attention to now have an enhanced value or an enhanced importance, and so the compensation has to go along with that. For instance, flexibility was something that we kind of always took for granted and now have become increasingly aware that it's an important element. So we start with what are the services that are needed by the system, are the rules and the market constructs there to fairly compensate for those services, and then ask, for specific resource classes that folks are saying are being disadvantaged by the market rules, can we understand what the gap is between our understanding about the services and the needs and what that resource class is providing? So for baseload energy, I think this has come to us largely from the perspective that those baseload resources are always on, they're very secure, they have on-site fuel, whether we're talking about nuclear or coal, they're not waiting for just-in-time gas delivery like a gas plant, they're not waiting for the wind to blow or the sun to shine. So what we have seen over the years is various market operators and the Commission itself have reviewed market rules to make sure that the value for being on when the system most needs resources to be on is as sharp and as accurate as possible. Some of the market operators that run capacity markets, these are payments that had traditionally been available to resources just to kind of be in existence, have refocused those markets to being on when the system needs them most. So if you have a baseload resource that, again, has on-site fuel and it is on when the system most needs it, their capacity market revenues will reflect the value they're bringing from being on when the system needs them. The Commission has taken some actions over the last few years on energy price formation, and again, ensuring that the prices for energy during the system's most constrained or most stressed conditions are as acute as possible. And if you've got a coal plant or a nuclear plant that is running during those stress conditions, the energy prices should reflect as acutely as possible the fact that the system needs those resources to stay on. There has been some argument that one of the values that the baseload fleet is providing is a diversity value, especially as gas has gotten so inexpensive and there has been really kind of a rush to build really only close to almost only new gas resources. And the diversity argument can be a difficult one, especially for the market operators, because it can put the market operator in the position of kind of making an economic risk management choice on the behalf of load-serving entities. So kind of a decision that the load-serving entities should hedge in a particular way by having a particular portfolio of resources in case gas prices go up. That has traditionally not been a role that the centralized markets have wanted to play, and rather they've preferred to allow the load-serving entities themselves to make those sort of hedging decisions. And so diversity for the sake of economic hedging it can be a tough service to value from the organized wholesale market perspective. There probably is also a reliability-focused version of diversity that just says, especially for gas resources that are all along the same pipeline, if something were to happen to a particular pipeline and knock out a number of gas plants, that lack of diversity or that kind of single mode failure might have reliability concerns that also has an economic value. And some markets are starting to think about that, about whether the diversity of having different kinds of fuels that have different kinds of fuel arrangements brings a reliability benefit. And again, that is something that the wholesale markets could explore and could pursue. These kind of more market-oriented reforms probably have helped on the margin for the baseload resources that are feeling the most financial stress. But I think it's fair to say likely have not removed entirely the financial stress that resources are feeling from the variety of sources that we've talked about today. A lot of times, this, or at least for a chunk of the discussion, this has come to the Commission in the form of a desire by individual states to preserve carbon emission-free resources. And so there we're talking really about the nuclear fleet, part of the baseload fleet. When we're talking about an environmental benefit, in places where a state or regions have established something that looks like a carbon price, the wholesale market can easily incorporate that into the functioning of the market. So in California, in the regional greenhouse gas initiative states, where there's a value on carbon, that value flows easily through the wholesale markets. Absent a carbon price, though, the wholesale market is not going to place any value on the carbon-free attribute of a nuclear unit. I'm clearly not advocating on behalf of a carbon price. What I'm simply trying to state is that for states that have carbon goals that are not expressed through a carbon price, there shouldn't be a surprise that the wholesale markets are not achieving those state goals. So as a result of that, some states have decided to take actions both to preserve their nuclear fleet, but to also encourage and bring on other clean resources in some cases. In other cases, just entirely different state objectives driving either the desire to build a new gas plant within the state or preserve some set of existing resources. But certainly over the last probably 2 or 3 years, the level of state activity in selecting new resources or preserving existing resources has increased, and it can become complicated from a federal perspective when the state is making an out-of-market action, an out-of-market payment to a resource, and then that resource goes into the wholesale market and competes on a basis that some would view as unfair against resources that don't get any state support. So these are complicated issues of shared jurisdiction, of shared authority, and so the Commission, as we were watching this activity, ultimately decided to hold a technical conference on May 1st and 2nd. Going into the conference, the goal was to discuss ways that we could develop regional solutions that reconcile the competitive market framework with the increasing interest by states to support particular resources or particular resource attributes. A central part of this discussion was a better shared understanding of the long-term expectations regarding the relative roles of the wholesale markets and state policies in shaping both the quantity and the composition of resources needed to cost-effectively meet future reliability and operational needs. I think that focus kind of falls into there are two general jobs. There is a kind of a market job or an economic job that goes to determining which resources are going to enter and exit the wholesale market. I think the economic or market job in terms of whether individual resources enter or exit, that probably can be shared between the state and the federal government. And I think there probably can be some ambiguity as to whether it's the state or the federal government leading the charge on that economic or market job. The biggest issue when there's ambiguity about who's leading the way is that potentially the state and the federal and the wholesale markets will work at cross purposes from the perspective that customers might end up paying more for the fleet of resources that are serving their wholesale needs because there's not a closer coordination between the state actions and the federal government. And that cost is a real cost, and that's important. But again, ambiguity around that is probably manageable in small margins. There's also a reliability job, though, and that's I think a lot of what Melissa was talking about with resource adequacy, and the reliability job of ultimately at the end of the day, who is taking responsibility for making sure there are enough resources so that on the most stressed conditions, the lights do not go out. That is a place where it is more troubling if there is not a clear understanding of whether the state or the wholesale market is taking the lead on that job. And there, I think it is harder to share the job because sharing of the job can lead to that ambiguity. And if no one is taking ultimate authority, then there's a fear that no one is taking that there's no one doing that. And if there's no one doing that and the lights go out, that becomes a very big thing. And the entire electric industry is designed around avoiding that from happening. So that was kind of how we entered into the discussion on May 1st and 2nd. We talked during those 2 days about, at the end of the day, a number of possible paths forward. And we're still collecting comments from our technical conference, but I'll provide a little commentary on kind of what we heard as the possible paths forward. There were some extreme paths forward that would either have the federal wholesale markets heavily, provide a heavy amount of deference to the states. There was the kind of the opposite extreme path that would have the wholesale markets kind of assert primary and very strong control over both the economic job and the reliability job. Some panelists, there's no question there are some panelists that advocated for one or the other of those kind of extreme paths. Again, personal opinion from what I heard was more of a desire for kind of a middle ground path. And then we heard two versions of those middle ground paths. One middle ground path was what we kind of called, or started to be called during the conference, an accommodate path that would, to some extent, defer to state decision-making in the first instance, but then make sure that the price signal that resources that don't get state support are receiving from the wholesale market is still a strong price signal that will still preserve the financial viability of those resources not getting state support. So it's kind of allow the state-supported resources into the market and try to not interfere with their entry into the market, but then also don't interfere with the price signals that the rest of the fleet is getting. There was another path that ultimately got called the achieve path, or the within market path, and that path talked about attempting to incorporate all of the state goals into some sort of wholesale market construct that is integrated with the rest of the wholesale markets. So the easiest version, I think, for me to think about, but there probably are plenty of other examples, where a state has or a region has some clean energy goals, trying to find a wholesale market mechanism to incorporate those clean goals into the wholesale market and then integrate that clean energy market with the rest of the wholesale markets in a way that they all kind of function well together. That might mean that there's a set of state objectives that can't be integrated into the wholesale market, and so one will have to figure out what to do with those. And I think some folks talked about a kind of an accommodate option for the resource or the state goals that can't be incorporated. But those two middle-of-the-road paths were the ones that I think we spent a decent amount of time talking about. So where we are right now is we recently requested comments. We'll get those comments. We're still waiting to have 2 more commissioners confirmed before the commission has a quorum and could take any action anyway. So this is still a set of issues that are very live and in front of the commission right now.
Well, thanks, Arnie. You really, I think, exemplified the complexity of this challenge and the degree to which, you know, the federal government, states, and regional system operators and such are involved in trying to work out an agreement between all parties. So I think there's a lot going on here. And again, I want to mention that for those who would like to ask any questions of our esteemed panelists, please enter those in the box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will be able to have them answer your questions after our next presenter. So we're fortunate now to have Senator Sue Rezin from Illinois as our final speaker. She was elected to the Illinois House of Representatives in 2010 and was then appointed to the Illinois State Senate. In 2015, she was appointed assistant leader in the Senate Republican caucus. Senator Rezin serves as the minority spokesperson on the Senate Energy Committee and is a member of the Senate Appropriations, Higher Education, Education, Executive, and Transportation Committees. So let's welcome Senator Sue Rezin.
Well, first of all, good afternoon. Thank you, Glenn, for the opportunity to talk a little bit about the new Illinois energy policy that we just passed. I would like to thank the previous speakers, Melissa and Arnie, for kind of teeing up what we're doing and why we passed this new policy in the great state of Illinois. Bear with me, we just finished our session last night at about midnight, so I am trying to catch up on everything else. But just a background here regarding the Senate district that I represent, which is the 38th Senate District. I am located about 60 miles southwest of Chicago. I represent, in my mind, the energy and producing and chemical corridor of the country, because I do have 3 nuclear power plants in my backyard. I also, because of that, have a major grid system. We also have a peaker plant, coal plant, natural gas plants. Actually, I have another natural gas plant, about $1 billion investment being built in my district as we speak. I also have wind and solar farms within the district as well. So because of the district and I see, you know, these are great producing companies in our backyard, but we also have challenges as well. I do represent a chemical corridor as well. These large energy users are specifically located there because of the energy infrastructure that we have in our backyard, and we've experienced back during the polar vortex where the chemical industry in my district literally had to shut down because they are a natural gas fed company that, because of the polar vortex, experience challenges. So we have a lot going on in this district. I am the minority spokesman for energy. We've worked with lawmakers for the past 24 months working on a new groundbreaking energy policy to save 2 of our 6 nuclear plants from closure. Illinois is a deregulated power market, and the plants were facing imminent closure. For example, several other plants have been closed in the U.S. The last nuclear plant that was closed in the state of Illinois was in Zion in the late 1990s. In June of 2015, Exelon said that they would close the Clinton plant in June of 2017 and their Cordova plant in June of 2018 unless the legislature acted on energy reforms. To us, this meant thousands of jobs, local economies, and the state energy future were on the line. So we worked on Senate Bill 2814. What is Senate Bill 2814? This is the Future Energy Jobs Bill. It expands the state's energy efficiency programs and changes to the state's renewable portfolio standards sought by the renewable advocates. Also, this piece of legislation gives new subsidies for Exelon nuclear plants of about $235 million for 10 years. Some people call them subsidies. I call it valuing clean power, as Arnie was talking about. In this bill, we also put hard cost caps of 1.3% annually for large industrial and medium commercial users, and cost caps of 25 cents per month for an average ComEd consumer. There were new efficiency mandates by 2013 on ComEd and Ameren with the price caps. We also have a new renewable power program goal for wind and solar, which is 25% of our energy portfolio by the year 2025. And just to clarify, ComEd customers are located in the Chicagoland area, and Ameren customers are mainly the rest of the state. The Illinois General Assembly passed this law, which is the Future Energy Jobs Bill, in December 2016, which was signed into law by Governor Bruce Rauner. The law keeps the nuclear power plants in Cordova and Clinton in operation for another 10 years, which saves thousands of jobs and communities from total economic devastation. The law also strengthens the state's commitment to clean, reliable, and cheap power and limits electric rate increases to residential and business consumers across the state by capping the rates. You know, our state objective, anytime we see new energy policy coming before our committee, I always look at our objective, which is to provide reliable, efficient, and resilient energy at a competitive cost to the ratepayer. So anytime we have these big bills come before us, we see how they fit within our objective. The next slide, you know, this bill is good for DeWitt County. The Clinton power plant provides 2,000 direct and indirect jobs in and around DeWitt County and has an annual payroll of $63 million. It provides $7 million in economic impact for Clinton and the surrounding area and provides property tax revenue of almost $12 million, of which $7 million goes to the school district, $2 million to the county, and $1 million to the community college. This bill is good for the Quad Cities. The Cordova nuclear power plant, which is located in the Quad Cities, provides 4,000 direct and indirect jobs in the Quad City area and has an annual payroll of $75 million. It provides an economic impact of over $1.5 billion. But more importantly, this bill is good for Illinois' energy future. In total, the Illinois nuclear facilities contribute nearly $9 billion to the state economy, according to Exelon. The nuclear plants are carbon-free power that we need to keep as the federal Clean Power Plan moves, as we all know, to the state level. With half of the electricity in Illinois is coming from the nuclear power plants, since we have 6 of these plants located in Illinois. As you can imagine, taking 2 nuclear plants offline would result in electric bills climbing higher and higher for decades. So this new law allows Illinois to manage expected price increases. As you know, we have many challenges in the great state of Illinois, but one of the advantages of being a business in the state of Illinois is our low cost of power. So if you talk to any high energy users, they will tell you that this is a huge advantage, and that's one of the reasons that they do look to locate in the state of Illinois. This bill was also good for consumers. A study that was released and done by the economists at the Brattle Group, which is a global consulting firm, and they testified before a committee, found residential customers could see their electric bills increase $115 million, while businesses would see their bills increase almost $250 million annually if both of the nuclear plants closed. So this was an increase of over $3 billion over the next 10 years. Further evidence from the MISO survey found that potential generational shortfall as soon as the mid-2018 was a possibility if the 2 plants closed. So at a hearing last year, MISO staff said that the new power lines that would have to be considered to be built over several years at a serious cost to ratepayers to rebalance the lost supply if the plants closed. And as a policymaker and as somebody who represents kind of a rural district, and because I have a grid system that goes through my district, I have many times transmission lines trying to cut through the district to tie into this grid system. And this is a challenge from a policymaker's perspective. We have many farmers who are very protective about their land rights, and it's just very difficult anymore to site transmission lines. So my district really does not have much of an appetite for additional transmission lines should these plants close. Also, the 2 plants would avoid an additional 15 million tons of carbon pollution over the next 5 years. In one case, the Future Energy Jobs Bill is already reducing prices. We had an NBC affiliate out of Decatur said that the plan approved by the ICC will have Ameren, Illinois customers paying less for electric service delivery in 2017. For the typical residential user, say using about 10,000 kilowatts of electricity, this decrease would mean a savings of a couple bucks on a monthly bill. Ameren Illinois projects that stable energy supply, along with stronger energy efficient programs included in this bill, will result in decrease in customer electric rates beginning in June of 2017. So having briefly gone through at 30,000 feet what the piece of legislation that we passed does, I'd be happy as well to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Senator Rezin. That was fantastic, and we'll be taking some questions here. I just wanted to also mention that NCSL has some relevant reports and resources that I think you may want to take a look at. Recently, we just came out with our State Options to Keep Nuclear Energy in the Mix report, which is a fairly extensive, comprehensive report, and that is online. We also have an update to that report coming out soon as well. We also, if you'd like to sign up for our newsletter, we would be happy to send you updates and highlights of what's been happening in the states regarding, and the federal government regarding energy policy. And we also have a newsletter focused on nuclear called The Reactor that you are welcome to sign up for as well. So with that, we do have some questions, and the first one is related to one of, to an issue in the Northwest where there's a combination of both hydropower and abundant renewable resources, and kind of a challenge there between those two with really low-cost hydro competing with low-cost, though somewhat often a bit more expensive other renewables. And the question really is, to any of the panelists, I think. Is there a way, without having mandates on renewables, to really look at sending a market signal or having utilities convert to low-cost carbon resources without dictating that they be, for instance, wind and solar through these mandates, and then letting the market control those decisions? So, and that's a question for any of the panelists, if you'd like to jump in.
I'll take the first jump, and I'll say a couple things. I think definitely there are places, regions that are talking about, and this is particularly active in New England right now, actively talking about how the states in New England could get together and do a wholesale market version of kind of a clean energy auction. So the states would put in basically demand for clean energy, and then the wholesale market operator in New England, there's at least a proposal that some stakeholders are developing. The ISO New England would run an auction that would kind of determine what clean energy would be needed to serve the state's expressed desire for clean energy, and they wouldn't have to make the choice between a particular kind of clean energy, say offshore wind or solar or hydro, but all clean energy would kind of compete on an equal footing. Even in that proposal, I think they contemplate the potential that states might still want to say that they want a particular kind of clean energy rather than any kind of clean energy. I think in the Northwest, the one additional thing I'll say is, where you have multiple clean and low-cost resources competing with each other, sometimes the issue is just there's too much energy on the system at one time, and you have to kind of manually curtail one of those resources. That can be really troublesome because it feels like you're taking a very low and maybe zero cost resource and kind of throwing it away and not using it. There are efforts in the Northwest to build out the kind of the footprint of the California independent system operator so that there's a bigger market footprint that is automated on a more kind of real-time basis that could better use the transmission system, so that instead of curtailing that clean energy when it's when there's too much at one spot on the grid, to find a bigger market area and maybe find another place in the West that could displace kind of positive cost power and use that zero cost power more effectively across the greater Western region. There's certainly political issues around expanding the California market to other states, but that effort has been very active and fairly successful in the last few years, making that market area as big as possible. And so that's another way to kind of allow multiple resources to compete with each other.
Great. Did any of the other panelists have a comment on that one?
I think just in general, from a policy perspective too, and all states are different, and the values of what the states have in terms of energy providers are different. But again, going back to what our objective is, which is clean, reliable, efficient, resilient energy at a competitive cost, we always look at how does this all fit together from a policy perspective. One thing as well, I mean, we're lucky to have the nuclear fleet, 6 nuclear plants in the state of Illinois. Many states do not have that. I look at it as a huge asset, but it is very difficult right now to build these plants. It's very costly to build these plants, even though they do provide clean, inexpensive power. But businesses also have objectives when they're looking at, when they're building. And you're seeing a small trend of tech companies when they're building their headquarters or their companies, that they would like to use they would like to use all renewable energy. And as we're trying to figure out and build into our portfolio what makes sense, we need to think of these different dynamics and different objectives from businesses as well.
And this is Melissa. I would just echo, I don't have anything else significant to add. I would just echo Arnie's comment around diversity. I think that if there's anything to be learned from MISO's expansion, was that diversity of resources across the footprint help to mitigate what you're seeing sort of in the Northwest. So I echo that as being sort of an issue of the more resources that you have to choose from, that you have to dispatch at different prices, the more likely you are to keep those low-cost resources that are competing today online. And it's also, to Senator Resin's point, that states, I think, need the ability to set their own policies based on their objectives and goals, and the diversity and the footprint that you can gain from having a diverse footprint will enable you to integrate those technologies more cost effectively for the end use consumer.
So we have another question here, and this is related to Arnie's statement and kind of a question also. Who is responsible for ensuring reliability or energy diversity, for instance, since those things may not be taken, or at some point, is the wholesale market effectively pricing those, or should the state? And I think he basically said, is it the state or the wholesale market? And I guess the question is do any of you have comments on that, and whether there's examples of where a state has acted on that side? Because there obviously is always that concern over, well, the market should take care of these things since they're more efficient and it should be a lower cost. But obviously there has been some increased diversity because of state policies, and it sounds like that also may have decreased costs as well. So it's really just kind of a general question, and this is, obviously our audience is state legislators, and they're very interested in these, how they kind of parse those decisions on the state level when they're considering these types of actions.
I can just talk to the issue that we're dealing with, and Melissa alluded to that regarding the MISO issue that we have. Basically, in southern Illinois, currently there are companies, and again, Illinois is deregulated, but right across the border, in other states, they are not. And because the companies in Missouri will be compensated for their capacity load, then they can enter into our auction at a much lower price, as opposed to the same energy generator in Illinois enters into the auction and has to be compensated for capacity on top of the actual cost of energy. It's putting these energy producers at a huge disadvantage, and they're looking at potential closures of these generating facilities in southern Illinois. We're currently working on policy to try to create a fix to make it more competitive with southern Illinois and the states across the border when they are going into auction for energy. We hope to have something, I would say probably this fall, that deals with the issue, and hopefully then we'll stop any of the closures of the generating facilities in southern Illinois.
And I would just also mention, this is Melissa, just real quickly, I think on a reliability front, one of the, your question was around, has a state, we recently witnessed a state take responsibility sort of for reliability, looking at their state and their resource mix to ensure that they had resource adequacy in Michigan. When Michigan recently passed their legislation their energy legislation last year, where they explicitly took a look at how they would ensure there was sufficient resources to meet load obligations going on a forward basis to ensure that their retail choice load was covered. And I think they passed that legislation with the reliability piece in mind. So that's sort of a state who made I think a clear decision that that was something they wanted to look at and address in their legislation.
Great. And Arnie, did you have any comments on
Yeah,
that one?
Yeah, I'll add one thing, and I think from the wholesale market perspective, the one thing that I think we try to do is make sure that load serving entity, that that utility that is serving end use customers, that they have the ability to make a decision, a diversity decision based on their own kind of assessment about what is cost effective for them in the long run, in a way that the wholesale market rules don't interfere with that decision-making process. And there's a variety of technical details that kind of can sometimes get in the way of that, and that has been something that we have been working on over a period of time. So to some extent, if the market operator isn't best placed to do that, then you want to make sure that the market operator's rules aren't getting in the way of the individual market participants doing that for themselves.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. We are just out of time here and like to wrap this up. So we really want to extend a great warm thanks to our speakers who took time to share their expertise with us, and also thank you, the attendees, for participating in our webinar. And we want to remind you that we do have a recording that will be posted shortly along with the slides, and those will be made available within a week or so, and we will send out an email, but we'll also have that posted at the Energy website and the NRI website as well. Our next webinar, Going with the Flow, Sustainable Water Resources Planning and Policymaking, will be held on June 15th. So again, want to thank you for joining us, and hopefully we will see you at our next webinar.